Good morning on this little bit of a dull morning here in County Kerry, but nonetheless it's dry, so that's always a bonus in my book. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Rebecca, and I'm a homeopath and a QTT personal development coach and mentor. And I use all three of those to help you and your family to be as happy and as healthy as you can be and stay that way. So this morning's video is part of a series of ongoing videos that I do where we just pick a remedy to explore in a little bit more detail. These are homeopathic remedies and, they are part of the home prescribing kit that I base my learning course on. So that's the box. It's from Helios Pharmacy in England, and it has 36 remedies in it. And as I say, I base my online learning course around this kit, and it's a kit that you can have at home, and you can learn how to use all those remedies to treat the vast majority of minor illnesses for yourself or for your family. It's how I started being interested in homeopathy when I saw the fantastic results that I had. That piqued my interest and I wanted to know more. So that led me eventually to training to become a practitioner. And it's actually really relatively straightforward once you've had a little bit of teaching how to use these kits, and it saves you all sorts of problems. It saves you money, it saves you worry, it saves you time as well, because you get to know which remedies are suitable for which minor illnesses or even for which of your family members, and you've got them to hand. And if you join one of my courses, then you have regular access to me to ask questions, and you're part of a private, a members-only online support group where we can support each other in doing this and ask questions and get clarity and share experiences. So that's the intro anyway. And today's remedy is a brilliant remedy. It's what we call a polycrest. And what that means, if you haven't come across that term before, is it's a remedy that has a huge sphere of action. So it's capable of addressing a massive variety of different illnesses, providing, like any homeopathic remedy, providing the details of what's being experienced are similar enough to the picture of this remedy. So today's remedy is Apis, or Apis mel, as it's sometimes known, and that is a remedy made from the honeybee. And it's a remedy that, in essence, it addresses anything where there is swelling, redness, kind of stinging, darting pains, what else? Yeah, heat, and anything that is better for cold applications and worse for heat applications. So if you think of the honeybee, and that's it, often with remedies, that's a good way of thinking about it. It's going back to the doctrine of signatures, which is something that herbalists came across or put together basically in the 17th and 18th century. It very much believed in the appearance and the growing habits of plants being indicators of their medicinal properties. And it's actually uncanny how many times that works. It's not foolproof, but it does work. And in the case of the bee, it's really helpful, I think, to think about bees and how they behave, and that gives you some strong indications for using it as a remedy. So first of all, I'm going to put my glasses on because I need to just check my list. Yeah, so when you think about those details of what the Apis remedy is helpful for, so the stinging pains, the redness, the swelling, obviously the first thing to think about is stings themselves. So if you get stung by a bee or a wasp or any kind of insect, and what comes up is a swollen red lump, stinging, darting pains. The lump can look kind of almost shiny because it's stretched, because it's so swollen. And if that feels better if you put cold on it, but more painful when you put heat on it, then think of Apis. And I can see we've got a couple of people who've joined us. You're very, very welcome. I think, if I'm not mistaken, that's Valeria, I think. Yeah, I can't see at the moment. But anyway, you're very, very welcome. So Apis, it would be lovely if anybody's joining me who has already used remedies. Let me know if you've used Apis before. Just put a comment in or a thumbs up. Yeah, okay, great. Yeah, I thought so. And good morning, Melanie. Great, and it is Valeria. I thought it was with you. Sorry, a bit tongue-tied this morning. I thought it was you, Valeria. Yeah, for some reason there's a delay on Facebook showing me who is actually watching this morning. Anyway, you're both very, very welcome. I think there's a couple of other people as well. So, Valeria, I'm not surprised you've used Apis. You've probably used it lots of times. Really handy remedy. So coming up, it's this season now where I don't know if anyone's noticing, but I'm noticing a huge amount of bees around, which is fantastic. But they're usually looking for somewhere to set up home. They can, if they feel threatened, they can sting you, obviously, and wasps as well, as Valeria is saying. Apis bee and wasp stings, yes, absolutely. But even mosquito bites, actually. There was a time ages ago where I used to react quite badly to mosquito bites. And if I was bitten, it would come up just like that. It would be a red welt. It would be stinging, and I would feel that it was much relieved by putting a cold flannel on or something, but worse if it was near heat. And Apis used to help enormously. So think of it for all those bites and stings, but also things like urticaria. And Valeria is saying it's in our first aid package. Yes, absolutely. It's always in one of these kits. And the Helios kits come in different forms. They're slightly different colour boxes according to what their uses are, but that one is the basic 36 remedy kit, usually in there. So it's great for insect stings and bites, things like that. Also fabulous when you get any kind of edema. So edema is just swelling where there is a fluid retention within the cells of the body, basically. It's an inflammatory response. It's often part of some kind of allergy. Or it could be just from pressure. I'm thinking of people who have swollen legs, or swollen ankles, things like anything where there is swelling and puffiness. You might not necessarily even get the stinging, darting pains, but just that swelling and puffiness is worth considering Apis for. So getting on and off planes. So again, there was a time years ago in my previous job where I used to do a lot of air travel. And sometimes my lower legs and ankles would swell up if it was a long flight. And Apis, again, very, very handy. Actually, arnica is very, very useful for that kind of pressure-induced problems from travelling as well. But Apis, if you've got the puffy swelling. Thanks for the thumbs up. So, okay, so just going back to, because obviously the bites and stings are not the only thing that apis is good for. We've already talked about the swelling. So when we think about the bees' activity, there's a lot of the way that bees live and the way that they behave that it comes up in apis as a remedy. So like all polycrest remedies, they can be excellent for settling not just bites and stings and acute illnesses, but a whole illness of somebody, if that makes sense. So you start to see some mental emotional symptoms as well, which are very consistent with the way that the bee is. And the first one is that obviously bees live in community. They live in large hives, 40,000, 70,000 bees all together, and they act as a group. They are a very tight community. Bees do not do well when they're on their own. In fact, they mostly don't survive. They all have a role, and their reason for being, if you like, is for the good of the greater community, for the good of the hive. And if you see somebody who is in need of apis at a deeper level than just a bite or a sting, but you might even see this as a result of a bite or a sting or some kind of acute pathology, you will see that there is, there are two kind of polarities of behaviour, really. One is about protecting the family and doing everything for the family or for the wider group, basically. And if that group or their position in that group is threatened, then that's when they can get nasty and they can get very jealous, very quite deliberately malicious in their behaviour. So it's like the sting. So most of the time with bees, the stings are actually, they're not for us, they're for other bees. And if they do sting other bees, they don't die. But if they sting a human, because the sting is not meant to go into thick flesh, then they will die. So they don't actually sting unless they're very threatened, unless they're feeling that they have no other option, basically. So you'll see that kind of malicious verbal stinging in people who feel threatened. And I've got to say it's mostly women. So when you see apis in a wider sense, it's mostly a female remedy, and it has a lot of female pathology that it helps as well, which I'll come on to. So by and large, because we're dealing with swelling and edema, the areas of the body that are most affected would be the brain, the lungs, anywhere where there are cavities, the heart, the abdominal cavity, so lots of pelvic-based pathology, the synovial cavities in the joints. So you probably have heard, if you know about bees, that bee stings are meant to be very, very good for things like arthritis. Because you'll see, if you think about what I said in the beginning, a lot of the time when there's arthritis, any inflammation in the joints, you get that redness, that swelling, puffiness, kind of stinging, darting pains, and often numbness. And the numbness is there because of the swelling, because obviously if you've got that level of swelling, then it's often inhibiting blood flow, but it's also inhibiting the neural pathways, so the nerves. So you often will get numbness somewhere around the area that's swollen. And when you take a microscope to the interstitial cavities of the body, the cells that are actually being swollen when you get edema like that, it actually looks exactly like honeycomb. It's weird. Anyway, the mental emotional symptoms, going into a little bit more detail, very restless, So if you think of the bee kind of flitting from flower to flower, obviously as humans, we don't have a reason to do that. But there is that similar restlessness of just not being able to settle, just going from one thing to another. Very angry if disturbed, particularly from work. Because work is very important to bees, as we know, because they're working for the good of the hive. I've just seen Jackie there. Good morning, Jackie. You're very welcome. So we're talking about apis this morning, the remedy in your kits made from the honeybee. And equally, if the honeybee is, if the workers or the young worker bees are, for some reason, they are ignored or abandoned, or they feel that they don't have a purpose, they go into a sort of comatose state. They go into a state of inactivity, basically, because they're not useful to the hive. I haven't got time today to go into why that happens, but it does on occasion. And you know that beekeepers use smoke to dull down the hive, to actually make them a bit sleepy and a bit comatose. And if that happens to women in need of apis, if they start to feel that they are neglected in some way, that they don't have a purpose, that they, perhaps, if their kids are older and they're leaving home, or they don't need them anymore, or they feel that their husbands are neglecting them in some way, they will start to shut down. So that's when you get, kind of very tired, don't want to do anything, want to just sit around. Things like an interest in sex, so libido goes right down. You can even have physical pathology manifesting, like periods not happening or starting to get very irregular, disappearing altogether sometimes. So if that starts to happen for any reason, whether it's kind of appropriate, coming up to menopause, or if it happens in very young women, women who've perhaps had kids and can still have kids, and they're starting to feel like that. If the symptoms fit, then it's worth thinking about apis. And I would recommend that if that's the case, that you come to a practitioner, because there will be other things going on, obviously. And when there's internal pathology, things like ovarian cysts, those sort of things respond very well to apis if they're indicated. You can't see them, and they're usually not acute illnesses. So the purpose of you using your kit, unless you're very experienced, is really to just be addressing the acute illnesses, so the minor illnesses. But it's useful to see if somebody's heading in the direction of needing a little bit deeper help, that you can spot that and start thinking about possibly, giving apis, or helping the practitioner by selecting appropriate symptoms. So, yeah, and when women feel neglected or threatened in their position within the family or within the wider group, that's when they can get particularly jealous, usually of other women, obviously. But the jealousy is usually about their own dreams and their own plans having been put on hold. Maybe it's even a neglect on their part of, their appearance, or, taking care of themselves. And they can see in another woman who seems to be a threat. Maybe they are perceiving that their partner or husband is maybe, interested in this other woman. They're jealous because they can see that's actually where I want to be. That's what I want to be doing. But I didn't, because I've sacrificed it for the good of the family, for my children, for the family as a whole, or for a community. So that's when, like the bee, they're much more likely to be jealous, to be a bit bitchy. That kind of stingy behaviour will come out. They tend to, if they're not in a comatose state, they are big talkers. So very active verbally. So they'll be actually quite entertaining and loquacious. I like that word. It's an old-fashioned word, but I like it. It means talks a lot. But also in their speech, they're quite hard to follow sometimes. They can jump from subject to subject, just like the behaviour of the bee. The other thing is, so things, physical disease, if you like, anything to do with the control of fluid in the body. So if you think about the manifestations of a sting or the physical acute diseases of apis, it's all to do with swelling. So what controls water balance in us? Well, it's our kidneys and the various tubes and apparatus that are largely governed by our kidneys. So our bladder, our urinary tract, all of those organs in our waterworks. And those are the organs that are really helped by apis, because they can get, although you can't see this, but they can get inflamed, red, hot, swollen, obviously. So if you are somebody that suffers from cystitis or any other kind of urinary tract infection, and you feel that it's hot, the pee is hot, you get those stinging, cutting pains, then think of apis. Really, really handy. Kidney infections too, particularly right-sided kidney infections, and obviously they can manifest in a similar way to the cystitis, with the stinging pains and the hot urine. Thirstlessness, strangely, and which can be quite dangerous, obviously, in a kidney infection, that you do actually need to keep drinking to clean things out. But if apis is the remedy that's indicated, then there will be a reluctance to drink. Very, very handy in eye infections, and in Chinese medicine, the eyes are very linked to the kidneys. So if you get things like conjunctivitis or styes, any kind of eye infection where you have the redness, the puffy swelling, again, because the area is so swollen, it can look kind of shiny. Stinging pains, you often get that with styes. Very handy remedy for that. Again, particularly if it's right-sided, but not necessarily exclusively so. I've talked about plane travel, so swelling if you're travelling. Also, if you are somebody that experiences edema when the weather is hot, some people can get swelling, swollen ankles, swollen legs, swollen joints in hot weather. And just like the bee, bees do not like cold, although they can, if they stay in a safe, warm hive altogether, they can actually survive unbelievably cold temperatures, but they will be largely inactive. The venom of the bee is known to be much more vicious, if you like, much more toxic in hot weather than it is in cold weather. And that's the same with any kind of apis disease, that you will feel better for cold and worse for heat. And that's why swelling, if it's going to come up and it's going to respond to apis, you're going to experience it in the hot weather, not the cold weather. Allergies, yeah. And not just minor allergies, but actually one of the biggest things is anaphylactic shock. And I had personal experience of that many years ago when my nephew was, I think, gosh, he was only about 7, I think, 7 or 8, something like that. And my sister rang me in a blind panic. She'd already called 999 because something had happened. I can't remember what. I think he'd either been stung or he'd eaten something, and he was in a state of anaphylaxis, which means that he was swelling up in front of her. And part of that swelling was obviously your throat swells, and that cuts off your ability to breathe. It's highly dangerous. People can die from it. But it is a very, very over-the-top allergic response. And because she was clearly extremely worried because the ambulance hadn't appeared, she called me in a panic, and I said, okay, start giving Apis really every few minutes. Just keep giving it, which she did. Kept on the phone with me, and within half an hour, he was actually back down to normal. He could breathe. He was fine. It was actually slightly embarrassing for her because by the time the ambulance showed up, he was absolutely fine and actually never had such an extreme reaction again. Good morning, Catherine. You're very welcome. So we're talking about Apis this morning, the homeopathic remedy, which is extremely useful for all manner of things, but I was just talking about anaphylactic shock or allergic responses, basically. So anything where there is redness, heat, swelling, and stinging and darting pains. So if you do have somebody, I've got one of my clients who came to me because she had very, very severe allergic reactions, and she was carrying an EpiPen around. And she now, actually, after treatment, she still carries not an EpiPen, she carries Apis around with her. She hasn't actually, touch wood, she hasn't actually had an extreme response for years now, but that habit is still there, so she always carries Apis instead of her EpiPen. So, yes, I was talking about the fact that it's brilliant for a lot of female complaints, right-sided ovary pains, and ovary complaints generally, particularly cysts. Very, very useful for that. I've treated a few women for ovarian cysts using Apis. Beautiful, beautiful results. Things like loss of libido, feeling neglected by your partner, your whole system sort of shutting down. So it won't surprise you perhaps to know that it's actually very useful at menopause or any time where the hormonal system has been disrupted in some way. Can be very handy in thyroid complaints, particularly when the thyroid, well, actually either way, but I was going to say when the thyroid starts to shut down for some reason, which often goes along with a loss of libido. Valeria is saying, did you use sepia for the ovarian cyst? Yes, I have. That is another one that can be very, very handy for that. There are lots of remedies, obviously, for all kinds of complaints. Valeria is asking, does it match with the Apis? No, it's a good question, actually, because obviously with sepia, there is a general shutting down and sluggishness. With Apis, the shutting down is not so obvious often. It can often be the physical shutting down, but still quite active and, quite kind of, that bitchiness that can come out when women are feeling threatened or bad-tempered. With sepia, it's more a kind of gradual, heavy sluggishness. With Apis, you don't get that heaviness so much. Sepia often have a feeling that their whole lower abdomen is going to, yes, softer. It's softer, but it's heavier, and there's almost a feeling with sepia that your whole pelvis is going to drop down. So that, which is why it's so brilliant for things like prolapses. But there is things with sepia, there'll be things like weight gain, and you won't get the puffiness. There's very seldom things like edema, whereas with APIS, you're going to see that on some level if you're prescribing it, on a chronic level. So I hope that answers your question, but it's a good question, Valeria. There are other things that will differentiate between the two as well, because obviously when you're prescribing it for a whole person's state, not just a little part of them, then you're going to be looking at a much wider picture. And Valeria saying thank you. Yeah, good question. So thank you for asking it. And also, actually, when you're prescribing any remedy, you're obviously going back to very important aspects to help you pick your remedy, is the modalities. It's what we call the modalities of any illness. So what I mean by that is you're looking at, if you're looking at a sting, for example, you're looking at what makes that sting feel a bit better, what gives it relief, and what maybe makes the person feel worse. And that can be times of the day. It could be, cold or heat, as we've discussed. If it's APIS, then the sting is going to get some relief by you applying something cold, is going to be really ramped up and aggravated by you applying something hot. So those are the kind of details when you're trying to differentiate between remedies that they're really going to tell you whether it's APIS or whether it's something else. You will have some remedies, for example, that will be exactly the other way around, that the sting will be actually better for better for heat and worse for cold. Arsen alb or arsenicum is like that. Rus tox is another one for stings, where the sting will actually feel better if you apply heat. So that's another really good way to differentiate between remedies. In fact, it's probably the best way. Yeah. And in terms of modalities, that's pretty much all you need to remember with APIS, is if you just remember that with the redness and the swelling, that it's better for cold, worse for heat. You can't go far wrong with that, really. The other thing, which is a kind of a strange one, is if you're thinking about children who might need APIS, it can be very, very useful, actually, for children who are a bit hyperactive, a bit restless, can't settle on anything. So obviously we're kind of going into things like ADD, ADHD, things like that. But it doesn't have to be. It can just be, if a child is really finding it hard to settle, and is also quite destructive. They want to actually break things. There's a kind of almost compulsion to break things. And with the restlessness, there's a sort of dullness as well. So you're getting both the polarities of the B behaviour. It's a strange thing. I have seen it in a couple of children. Hard to describe, but you'll know what I mean if you have a child like that. Although there's the restless behaviour, there's a sort of dullness to the comprehension of the child, to the learning or to the understanding of the child. But that restlessness can be greatly soothed by running water, listening to running water. So if you see all those symptoms in a child and you want to help them in some way, then maybe APIS is worth trying. But, as I said before, for things like that, you're probably better off coming to a practitioner. We talked earlier about the kidney stuff. Yeah, so things like cystitis, urinary tract infections. anywhere actually where there is inflammation, and perhaps obviously inflammation that you can't see. So any disease state where there is, the name has itis in the name, means it's inflamed, basically. So arthritis, cystitis, nephritis, which is actually it's part of your waterworks, part of your kidney and waterworks setup, and just means that those particular tubes are inflamed. So if you've been diagnosed with anything and you recognise the kind of stinging, darting pains, and that you know, there's any way of telling whether you're better for cold and worse for heat, then think of apis. What have I forgotten to tell you? I think that's pretty much it, really. If anybody's got anything to ask me, please do. Yeah, like the bee, actually, if you're thinking about the wider mental emotional symptoms of apis, very sensitive to touch, so and colour and toxins in general, smoke in particular. Bees are highly susceptible to any electrical pulse, any electrical disturbance, which is why, tragically, we're seeing so many bees dying at the moment, because of all the 5G in particular, which is ramped up way beyond what we've ever experienced before. They are kind of like our canaries in the coal mine, if you understand that analogy. In the old days, the canaries were sent down the coal mine to detect if there were toxic gases in the mine, and to prevent the men going down there and being poisoned. Well, that's what our bees are at the moment with electrical pollution. Our birds and our bees and our birds, and when you see them dropping dead and you know, literally falling out of the sky, we need to listen to that. We need to look at it, because we are affected by electro pollution as well. And actually, some homeopaths have used apis in cases of extreme sensitivity to electromagnetic pollution, because there are a lot of people who are much more sensitive than most of us, and they are already feeling the toxic effects of all the electromagnetic pollution that we are asked to negotiate. And that's being ramped up more and more and more. Good morning, Margaret. You're very welcome. I'm just coming to the end of today's remedy of the month, but you can watch the replay, please do, and obviously put your comments in if you are watching the replay, and I will answer them, comments or questions. So yeah, like the bee being sensitive, if you see somebody who is very susceptible to things like electromagnetic waves, you know, they can feel maybe mobile phones, you know, some people who are using mobile phones, and I kind of feel this sometimes myself. If I've been using it too much, I can feel a kind of buzzing, darting sensation in my hands, and that's a signal to me to step away from the phone immediately and start grabbing my crystals and everything else. Catherine is saying thank you. You're so welcome. Catherine, if you haven't joined me before, then there's a whole series of videos about remedies. And also I do a regular Monday morning live video on tips to how to live your life in a healthy and productive way, and just make little changes to your life so that you can be the best version of yourself that you can possibly be. So you may want to check those out too. But thank you for joining me today. So yeah, coming to the end of APIS. So that extreme sensitivity and that's reflected in the anaphylactic shock, actually, and the tendency to allergies, that they will react to any toxin, and people can be very susceptible, and have very big allergic reactions to toxins if they are in that sensitive state. So I hope that gives you an idea of some of the vast array of things that you can use APIS for. You're more likely to be using it for your bites and stings and skin reactions and things like that. But it's great, honestly. It will really speed up the recovery time from anything, even quite severe stings and bites. Oh yes, one more example. Chickenpox. My daughter, we were on holiday actually, and she was about 8, and she developed chickenpox, and we actually thought that we weren't going to be able to fly because she was very ill, very high fever, very restless, would not stay in the bed, just getting in and out of the bed the whole time. And she was doing this high-pitched screeching and holding her head, which is an indication, obviously, that she was having terrible headaches. And the swelling that I talked about can happen in the brain. It's part of the fluids, the edema that can happen in things like meningitis as well. Obviously, you're not going to be treating meningitis yourself. However, if you suspect it's there, start to give APIS. I gave APIS to my daughter just before we were due to fly, and friends of ours that thought we weren't going to make the flight because she was in such a bad state met us at the airport and could not believe how she had recovered. She basically was right back to normal for the entire flight. I think I had to give her one more dose during the flight. She didn't have that headache again. It just didn't manifest again. And the whole chickenpox thing moved along quite smoothly, and she was fully recovered within a week, I think it was. So you can, she was very swollen, and the lumps and bumps on her, were very much in the APIS mode. So red, hot, swollen, stinging pains, the screeching from the headache. So that's just another use. So I hope that's given you clarity. Oh, Monica, good morning. Monica is a homeopath herself, so she will know all about APIS. So yeah, if there's anything you want to add, Monica, please do. But I'm actually coming to an end, so if you're interested, do watch the replay. But you're very, very welcome. And I'm going to wish you all a lovely weekend. I hope you find your APIS useful, or I hope you actually don't need to use it at all. But at least you know that if you do need to address any of those issues, it's right there. So if you don't have a kit already, one of these kits, then I think, I'm not totally sure about this because it's different in different countries, but you can buy APIS over the counter. Monica, you might want to correct me on that if that's not one of the remedies that you can still get over the counter. Or you can order it from a pharmacy, or you can order it from your own practitioner if you already have a homeopath, obviously. Very handy remedy to have to hand, especially this time of the year. And usually I would be saying, put it in your holiday travel kit. But of course, you're not going anywhere at the moment, mostly. So bear that in mind for your first aid box, and let me know how you get on. Okay, have a wonderful weekend, everybody. Take care. Bye.